This rule applies to recommended purchases and exchanges of deferred variable annuities and recommended initial sub-account allocations. So really the key here is a recommendation has been made. Or it's an exchange, because if they already have one, why do they need a different one? I mean, I suppose it's possible, but you'll see. And initial, so that means at the very beginning, how are they going to invest within the choices that they have available to them, the money? So just as a small little review, deferred, not annuitized right away, going to be annuitized in the future. Variable, money in the stock market, no guaranteed rate of return. The idea being, when should you make this recommendation? I bet you know the answer to that. When it is, yes, suitable for your client. So, but that's under FINRA Rule 2111, which is the suitability rule. This is a very specific rule as to what you have to do, what member firms' responsibilities are whenever there is a sale made or an exchange of a deferred variable annuity. So it does not apply to reallocations among sub-accounts or to funds paid after the initial purchase or exchange of a deferred variable annuity. It's the initial sub-account allocations, it's the initial purchase, and the exchange as well. The rule also does not apply to deferred variable annuity transactions made in connection with a tax-qualified employer-sponsored retirement or benefit plan that is either defined as a qualified plan like a 403B or a 457 plan, unless, in the case of the plan, a member or associated person of the member makes a recommendation to an individual plan participant regarding this deferred variable annuity, in which case the rule would apply. So if you're saying what sub-account you think that they should put their money within their 403B or their 457 plan, if you're making a recommendation as to that allocation, then yes, the rule does apply. Otherwise, generally, when they choose to invest in those sub-accounts, they usually make the decision themselves. They oftentimes don't get investment advice. So if you, as a registered rep, had given this investment advice as to what they should put their money into, stocks or bonds or a growth fund or a balanced fund or what have you, then the rule applies. As far as the creation, storage, and transmission of documents under this FINRA Rule 2330, documents may be created, stored, and transmitted in electronic or paper form. They don't have to be in paper. Signatures may be evidenced in electronic or written form. It doesn't matter. So today, what can't you do on the computer, right? Everything is done on the computer. So paper is okay, but not required for the creation, storage, and transmission of the documents that are going to be required. We're going to use the term registered principal within this rule. So the registered principal could be a general securities sales supervisor, which is a person with their either Series 9 or 10. A registered principal would include a Series 24 licensed individual, or you with your Series 26. Because with your Series 26, you oversee people with their Series 6, and the recommendation to purchase a deferred variable annuity is very much within the realm of what you're going to be responsible for. So you're going to have some overseeing duties because your job is to supervise your associated persons, of course. This rule requires that no member or person associated with a member they cannot recommend to any customer the purchase or exchange of a deferred variable annuity unless such member or associated person with the member has reasonable basis to believe that the transaction is suitable in accordance with FINRA Rule 2111, suitability, and in particular, that there is a reasonable basis to believe that the customer has been informed in general terms of various features of deferred variable annuities, such as. So these are the things that you need to make sure that the customer understands. Potential surrender period and surrender charge. It's not a short-term investment vehicle. Potential tax penalty if the customer sell or redeem the deferred variable annuity before reaching the age of 59 and a half. What are the mortality and expense fees? What's the investment advisory fee? What are the potential charges for and features of riders? The insurance and investment components of deferred variable annuities, and the fact that there is market risk. There is no guaranteed minimum rate of return in a variable annuity. What are they going to earn in the future? I don't know. Nobody knows what the future will hold. It is also required that the member or associated person with a member has a reasonable basis to believe that the customer would benefit from certain features of deferred variable annuities. So really there's 4 key benefits of deferred variable annuities. During pay-in, the earnings are tax, what? Deferred, yes. And if you annuitize, you get paid for how long? Till you die, so for life. There is a death benefit. If you're in the pay-in period, when you die, the amount of your account goes to your beneficiary. There are living benefits to annuities. The member or associated person of the member must have reasonable basis to believe that this particular variable annuity as a whole, including the underlying subaccounts to which the funds are allocated at the time of purchase or exchange, any riders, similar product enhancements that it might have, are suitable for the particular customer. If it's an exchange, in the case of an exchange of a deferred variable annuity, the exchange also must be consistent with suitability determinations, taking into consideration whether the customer would incur a surrender charge, be subject to the commencement of a new surrender period, lose existing benefits, be subject to increased fees or charges. You must make sure that the customer would benefit from product enhancements and improvements, and whether or not the customer has had another deferred variable annuity exchange within the preceding 36 months. So it's kind of like, really, if they've already exchanged, you go back 3 years, in the previous 36 months, do you really need to make another recommendation to exchange again? It would be kind of like keeping them in that surrender period again, and then again? Oh wait, that's probably not best for your customer. So they really do want you to know when you're recommending an exchange, you're most concerned about looking back 3 years, 36 months prior, and that's kind of what FINRA is going to be looking at. I would say if they've done that exchange in the previous 36 months, then this exchange is not a good idea, not suitable. So all of these determinations that you put together as a registered rep are documented and signed because you're making a recommendation that they purchase it, you're making a recommendation how they invest their money, you're making a recommendation to the exchange. So what else do we need to find out about the customer prior to making a recommendation to purchase or exchange a deferred variable annuity? You must make a reasonable effort to obtain the following information. More than this would be fine, but this is the least you can find out. Age, annual income, financial situation and needs, investment experience, investment objectives, intended use of the deferred variable annuity. What's the client's time horizon? What are their existing assets, including investment and life insurance holdings? What are their liquidity needs? What's their liquid net worth, risk tolerance, tax status, and any other such information that seems reasonable to know prior to making this recommendation. Promptly after receiving information necessary to prepare a complete and correct application package for a deferred variable annuity, a person associated with a member who recommends the deferred variable annuity shall transmit the complete and correct application package to an OSJ. So why are we sending all this information to the OSJ? So that you, the principal, can look it over. So the registered rep puts together all of the information regarding this recommendation to purchase or exchange this deferred variable annuity, and it comes to you. What's your responsibility? Prior to transmitting a customer's application for a deferred variable annuity to the issuing insurance company for processing, but no later than 7 business days after you receive it, a registered principal is required to review and determine whether or not he or she approves the recommended purchase or exchange of the deferred variable annuity. So the package, all of this information comes to you. You, the principal, work in an OSJ. You should review it promptly. Review it promptly prior to when you send it off to the insurance company, no later than within 7 business days. As a principal, you should approve the recommended transaction only if you determine that there is a reasonable basis to believe that the transaction would be suitable based upon all of the requirements of this rule. You have to sign off on your approval. You can also reject it, of course. In addition to general supervisory and record-keeping requirements of the NASD and FINRA, a member must establish and maintain specific written supervisory procedures required to keep up with this rule. So all of this information that the registered rep put together, the registered rep signs off on all of the information. The principal signs off on the recommendation. So we keep all these books and records. We can keep these books and records in any format that we would like. The firm has to have rules, procedures in place to make sure that the registered reps truly understand to whom is a deferred variable annuity appropriate for. When is an exchange or recommendation to make an exchange a good idea? So this idea of training of the associated persons falls on your shoulders, of course. FINRA Rule 2330 does not prohibit a member from forwarding a check made payable to the insurance company, or if the member is fully subject to the Securities Exchange Act Rule 15C3-3, transferring funds for the purchase of a deferred variable annuity to the insurance company prior to the member's principal approval. So if the check is with the application, they can transfer the money to the insurance company even before the principal has approved the purchase or the exchange. That would be okay, so long as there are procedures in place that if the principal should reject this transaction, not give their approval, the money is returned, of course, to the customer. So it's okay to send the money on prior to the principal's approval, so long as there is a contractual agreement between the broker-dealer and the insurance company that in the event of no approval, the money is returned. Now, we talked about this already as far as what kind of information, as far as exchanges, previous exchanges, do you, the principal, really have to look out for? Exchanges made in the previous, how many months? Yeah. 36 months. Broker-dealers, associated persons must make reasonable efforts to ascertain whether the customer has had an exchange at any other broker-dealer within the preceding 36 months. An inquiry, just asking the customer if they have, is fine. That's a reasonable effort in this context. You have to document in writing both the nature of the inquiry and the response of the customer, of course. So FINRA Rule 2330, lots of information in there, quite a few questions I would expect on your test, a handful. NASD Rule 2430, charges for services performed. Broker-dealers can charge reasonable fees for services performed. They can charge reasonable fees. They cannot charge unfairly discriminatory fees. So lawyerly words, I know, but they like this idea. Can a broker-dealer charge fees for miscellaneous services such as collection of monies due for principal, dividends, or interest? Yes. Exchange or transferring securities? Yes. Appraisals? Sure. Safekeeping or custody? Any other services? Can they charge fees for these? Yes. What kind of fees? Reasonable, yes. NASD Rule 2440 has to do with fair prices and commissions. Fair prices and commissions. This rule relates to securities transactions. It doesn't matter if it's a listed security or an unlisted security. If the member buys from his own account from his customer, buys for his own account from the customer, or sells for his own account to his customer, he shall buy or sell at a price which is fair, taking into consideration all relevant circumstances, including market conditions with respect to such security at the time of the transaction, the expense involved, and the fact that he is entitled to a profit. So when they act as a dealer, broker, dealer side, they're trading for their own account. So if they're buying from a client for their own account or selling out of their own account, they can charge a markup or markdown, as the case may be, which must be what? Fair. Fair. They can make a profit, sure. If their inventory position was 10 and they sell it at 40 because the current market price is 40, that's fine. The dealer has the right to make a profit, and the commission must be reasonable. Well, markup or markdown in that case. If they're acting as an agent, that's the broker side of the transaction, that's when we see the commission or a service charge, but normally we call it a commission. What should the commission be? Also fair. So many decades ago, we deregulated commissions and in effect brought down commissions. So broker-dealers compete with each other now, and commissions are much less than they used to be on securities transactions. Unfair or excessive commissions or markup or markdowns in any customer transaction, whether or not the transaction is over the counter or on an exchange, is a violation. So this idea of NASD Rule 2440, where does it apply? It applies to all secondary market transactions. So secondary market, not the IPO. The IPO, it's sold at a fixed public offering price. So secondary markets, we really talk about over the counter. The NASDAQ stock market is over the counter, and there's also where unlisted securities trade over the counter as well. NASDAQ. And then there's the exchange. The New York Stock Exchange primarily, but there's other exchanges as well. So any transaction occurring in this secondary market, whether or not it's listed or unlisted, this rule applies. This rule applies. Fair markups. In 1943, what was the NASD adopted what has become known as the 5% policy. And the 5% policy applies to transactions executed in the secondary market. But it's not a rule, which it's kind of just a general guideline. So this idea that if the commission is more than 5% or if the markup's more than 5%, potentially could be a violation. And that's true, but it's not a steadfast. Remember that 8.5% is the maximum sales charge allowed on an open-end mutual fund? That's a rule. This 5% is not that same thing. It's a general guideline. It's a 5% policy. So since this adoption in 1943 of this 5% policy, the board has determined it is a guide, not a rule, which I said. A member may not justify markups on the basis of expenses which are excessive. So expenses must be, of course, reasonable. The markup over the prevailing market price is the significant spread from the point of view of fairness of dealings with customers in principal transactions. In the absence of other bona fide evidence of the prevailing market, a member's own contemporaneous cost is the best indication of the prevailing market price. A markup pattern of 5% or even less may be considered unfair or unreasonable under the 5% policy. So remember, it's a general guideline. It is not a steadfast rule. Determination of the fairness of markups must be based on the consideration of all the relevant factors, of which the percentage of markup is only one. So what are the relevant factors that they would look at in determining whether or not you are engaging in a secondary market transaction with a customer at a fair price, that you're charging a fair commission? The type of security involved. Some securities have a higher markup than others. For example, a higher percentage of markup customarily applies to a common stock transaction than to a bond transaction of the same size. So that would be fine. Likewise, a higher percentage applies to sales of units of a direct participation program and condominium securities than to sales of common stock. So the more liquid, usually the lower the commission charged is. DPPs are illiquid, so there's a higher commission charged, and that's okay. What other factors will be taken into consideration? The availability of the security in the market. In the case of an inactive security, the effort and cost of buying or selling the security or any other unusual circumstances connected with its acquisition or sale may have a bearing on the amount of markup justified. They will also look at the price of the security. While there is no direct correlation, the percentage of markup or rate of commission generally increases as the price of the security decreases. Generally, that is true. Even when the amount of money is substantial, transactions in lower price securities may require more handling and expense and may warrant a wider spread. They will also consider the amount of money that's involved in the transaction. A transaction that involves a small amount of money may warrant a higher percentage of markup to cover the expense of handling it. Any disclosure to the customer before the transaction is effected of information which would indicate the amount of commission charged in an agency transaction or markup made in a principal transaction is a factor to be considered. Disclosure itself, however, does not justify a commission or markup which is excessive or unfair in light of all other relevant circumstances. So just because you told them what it was before the completion of the transaction does not mean that it is fair. While each transaction must meet the test of fairness, FINRA, which they'll reference as the board in the rules sometimes, believes that particular attention should be given to the pattern of a member's markups. The board is aware of differences in the services and facilities which are needed by and provided for customers of members. If not excessive, the cost of providing such services and facilities, particularly when they are of a continuing nature, may properly be considered in determining the fairness of a member's markups. Transaction to which this fair commission rule is applicable. A transaction in which a member buys a security to fill an order for the same security previously received from a customer. This includes so-called riskless or simultaneous transactions. The rule applies to a transaction in which the member sells a security to a customer from their own inventory. So when they're acting as a dealer, the amount of markup would be determined on the basis of the markup over the bona fide representative current market price. This rule applies to a transaction in which a member purchases a security from a customer. So I mentioned that at the beginning of this rule, when they buy for their own inventory from a customer. The price paid to the customer or the markdown applied by the member must be reasonably related to the prevailing market price. A transaction in which the member acts as an agent, that's the broker's side. The commission must be fair in light of all relevant circumstances, of course. It also applies to transactions wherein a customer sells securities to or through a broker-dealer, the proceeds from which are utilized to pay for other securities purchased from or through the broker-dealer at or about the same time. When that is the case, the markup shall be computed in the same way as if the customer had purchased for cash, and in computing the markup, there shall be included any profit or commission realized by the dealer on the securities being liquidated, the proceeds of which are used to pay for securities being purchased. So you can charge them a commission twice, is basically what that's saying, and that's fine. Or charge them a markup and commission depending upon how you act. So let me ask you, does this rule apply to IPOs, to anything sold with a prospectus? No, it doesn't. It's only for secondary market transactions. Under the Securities Exchange Act of 1934, we have SEC Rule 15C1-7. It applies to discretionary accounts. So we've talked a lot within Section 15 as to the terms manipulative, deceptive, and other fraudulent device or contrivance. It is hereby defined to include any act of any broker, dealer, or municipal securities dealer designed to effect with or for any customer's account in respect to which such broker, dealer, or municipal securities dealer or his agent or employee is vested with any discretionary power, any transactions or purchase or sale which are excessive in size or frequency in view of the financial resources and character of such account. So that's a really big fancy way of saying whenever there's discretionary authority. First off, remember the order ticket's marked discretionary authority because it's your job to review all discretionary transactions. And there should be no excessive trading, whether or not it's in size or frequency. It is prohibited. What's it called? It's called churning. No churning. It is also considered manipulative, deceptive, or other fraudulent device or contrivance for any broker, dealer, or municipal securities dealer designed to effect with or for any customer's account, when there is discretionary authority, any transaction or purchase or sale, unless immediately after effecting such transaction with the broker, dealer, or municipal securities dealer, they have to make a record of the transaction. The record needs to include the name of the customer, the name, amount, and price of the security purchased, and the date and time when such transaction took place. Otherwise, if you're not recording the transactions on the books and records of the broker-dealer, it's a manipulative, deceptive, or fraudulent device. SEC Rule 15C2-8 has to do with delivery of a prospectus. It shall constitute a deceptive act or practice for a broker-dealer to participate in a distribution of securities with respect to which a registration statement has been filed under the Securities Act of 1933, unless the broker-dealer complies with the prospectus delivery requirement set forth in this section under this rule. So a broker-dealer participating in the distribution is any underwriter and any member or proposed member of the selling group. So this is a new issue. So anytime a share of stock is sold for the very first time, a registration statement is filed with the SEC. At some point, the SEC will clear the issue for sale. If you are a member in the syndicate or in the selling group, you have a legal responsibility to deliver the prospectus. So that's what this rule is about. Now, all of that you already know, but what is specific? In connection with an issue of securities, if the issuer has not previously been required to file reports under the Securities Exchange Act of 34, then the broker-dealer shall deliver a copy of the preliminary prospectus to any person who is expected to receive a confirmation of sale at least 48 hours prior to sending the confirmation. So this idea that the broker-dealer must deliver. A preliminary prospectus is a red herring. A red herring can be given out prior to the time in which a new issue has been cleared for sale. So preliminary prospectuses can be used prior to when the issue has been cleared for sale. When the issue's not been yet cleared for sale, no money can be taken. But if you think someone's going to buy the new issue when it is cleared for sale, you have to give them at least 48 hours before they will be sending out a confirmation for that transaction, the preliminary prospectus, because there is no reporting that's ever yet been done by this issuer. Okay, so sometimes issuers are already under the reporting requirements of the Securities Exchange Act of '34 because they've sold securities previously. So in that case, then this portion of the rule does not apply. So this portion of the rule is really about getting information, some sort of information, a preliminary prospectus, to a person who's going to be purchasing the shares soon, right? But not yet, because it hasn't yet been cleared for sale. Broker-dealers shall take reasonable steps to furnish to any person who makes written request a preliminary prospectus between the filing date and a reasonable time prior to the effective date of the registration statement. So if somebody asks you for the preliminary prospectus, then of course you would have to provide it. The time in which the preliminary prospectus can be used is the time from the registration statement being filed until the time it is cleared for sale. Reasonable steps shall include receiving an undertaking by the managing underwriter to send such copy to the address given in the request.